I invited Sarah and Leo to Thanksgiving dinner, Nathan said, casually slicing an apple. It's better for the family. I didn't argue. I just packed a bag and drove away. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang at my in-laws' manor. Nathan opened it, expecting our neighbors. Instead, he found a process server. I wasn't there to see the blood drain from his face, but the delivery confirmation text was highly satisfying. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know, what is the one boundary you have that you would never let anyone cross? I'm reading through your stories, and I'd love to know what makes you tick. I am a financial analyst. My daily life is governed by risk assessment, asset allocation, and mitigating liabilities. But for 3 years, my marriage to Nathan had been the most recklessly mismanaged portfolio of my entire life. It started under the guise of family support and logistical convenience. We moved into the east wing of his mother's sprawling traditional estate. Barbara, my mother-in-law, always referred to it exclusively as the guest wing. She treated me not as a daughter-in-law, not as an equal partner to her son, but as an interim guest on an extended, unpaid visa. Every holiday gathering, every family dinner, every minor interaction in the kitchen was a meticulously calculated reminder that I was merely occupying space in their grand legacy. What they strategically failed to mention at their elite country club lunches was that I was the sole venture capitalist, keeping that legacy from total collapse. Nathan was 32 years old and supposedly developing a revolutionary mobile application. In reality, he was burning through my primary income at an astronomical rate. I paid for his servers, his marketing consultants, the endless stream of networking lunches, and his daily living expenses. I also quietly paid the exorbitant property taxes on Barbara's manor, a minor accounting detail she conveniently omitted when playing the grand matriarch of the neighborhood. People always ask why an intelligent person stays in a situation where they are so clearly being drained. It is the invisible chain of the survivor. You become conditioned to a toxic, draining environment, slowly accepting a profound level of disrespect because it is constantly packaged as familial duty. You do not fight back because you are exhausted, trapped in a state of learned helplessness. You convince yourself that your financial compliance is the price of admission to a family. You endure the passive-aggressive comments, the slights, the constant boundary pushing because your survival mechanism tells you that keeping the peace is safer than starting a war. It is a psychological prison where your own empathy and sense of responsibility are weaponized against you. But empathy is a finite resource, and mine was operating at a severe deficit. The true irony, the variable they completely ignored, was the legal status of the manor itself. A year prior, Barbara had faced catastrophic foreclosure. To save her precious social standing, I used my late grandfather's trust to buy the debt directly, titling the deed solely to the trust, not to me personally or the marital estate. Legally, the manor belonged entirely to me. I held the deed. Yet, Barbara continued to treat me like a nuisance tenant who was perpetually late on rent. Nathan continued to treat me like an angel investor who didn't require a return on investment. I had allowed myself to be relegated to the margins of my own property, silently funding their delusions of grandeur. I didn't weep over the realization. I simply recognized that the current operational model was completely unsustainable. The overhead was far too high, the disrespect was constant, and the return was absolute zero. It was time to restructure the asset and eliminate the dead weight. The catalyst for the total restructuring occurred on Thanksgiving morning. Barbara had spent the entire week planning a lavish, performative dinner, ordering premium organic turkeys, vintage wines, and artisanal centerpieces, all ultimately charged to a high-limit credit card solely in my name. I had spent the morning reviewing quarterly reports in the guest wing, staying out of her way when Nathan walked in. He was completely unbothered, casually adjusting his watch as he delivered a notification. Nathan looked at me like I was being unreasonable, his eyes narrowing in that familiar, manipulative way. Sarah is bringing Leo, and Mom insisted it's for the boy's stability. It's been arranged for weeks, I thought you knew. He claimed it was strictly for Leo's sake, using the child as a pawn to maintain his own comfort. He claimed it was strictly, for Leo's sake, to maintain a cohesive family unit for the holidays. Sarah, a 31-year-old school teacher who somehow afforded a luxury lifestyle on a modest salary, had always been a looming parasitic presence in our marriage. Nathan didn't ask for my input or discuss the logistics. He issued a directive. I was expected to smile, pour the expensive wine I had funded, and play the gracious, silent host while Sarah occupied the seat of honor next to Barbara. I looked at Nathan, standing there in the home I legally owned. I saw the absolute certainty in his eyes that I would simply absorb this massive disrespect, just as I had absorbed his endless business failures and his mother's daily cruelty. In that fraction of a second, the invisible chain shattered completely. I finally understood my exact valuation in this family structure. I was not a wife. I was not a daughter-in-law. I was pure utility. I was the silent generator keeping their extravagant lights on. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice, cry, or demand basic respect. You cannot negotiate respect in an environment that only values your utility. I just nodded, packed a single overnight bag with my essential documents, and walked out the pale front door of my own property. I drove to a quiet, secure hotel downtown, opened my laptop, and logged into my banking and utility portals. It was time to shut off the generator. I operated with total clinical detachment, tracking the numbers across the screen. First, I accessed the credit card portal. I completely canceled the primary card that was currently paying for the catered Thanksgiving feast set to arrive in 3 hours. Next, I accessed the utility accounts for the manor. I had been monitoring their habitual latenesses for months and had already scheduled the account termination dates for the holiday weekend, knowing the utility company's automated systems wouldn't allow manual overrides during the holiday closure. I completely severed the financial supply lines. I didn't feel a trace of anger. Anger is a messy, reactive emotion that clouds judgment. What I felt was the cold, sterile satisfaction of balancing a wildly uneven ledger. I was simply withdrawing my capital from a failing, toxic enterprise. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, while they were busy setting the long dining table with my crystal glasses, I had financially dismantled their entire holiday. I ordered a simple room service lunch, poured a glass of sparkling water, and calmly waited for their fraudulent transactions to decline. The digital notifications began flooding my phone at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. My screen lit up with a barrage of frantic texts from Nathan. The elite caterers had arrived at the manor, and the final payment had bounced. The premium grocery delivery service had flagged their account for fraudulent activity. Then, at 4:30, the inevitable operational failure occurred. Because I had canceled the overdue utility payments that Barbara had routinely ignored for months, the power grid to the manor was remotely suspended. The grand Thanksgiving dinner was suddenly plunged into complete darkness. Nathan's text messages escalated rapidly, from confused to absolutely furious. He demanded I return immediately to fix the banking errors. He told me I was embarrassing the family in front of Sarah and ruining the holiday for Leo. He aggressively ordered me to come back and play my part as the supportive wife. I simply muted his notifications, poured another glass of water, and watched the public social media feeds. Despite sitting in a freezing, dark house with angry, unpaid caterers, Barbara was busy uploading pre-taken photos of the perfectly set dining table to her social networks. Her captions praised her wonderful, blessed family and made a passive-aggressive, thinly veiled note about how some people just choose to be moody and miss out on the beautiful moments. It is a deeply fascinating psychological study to watch people desperately project wealth when they have absolutely nothing to back it up. This is the ultimate illusion of power from an empty wallet. People like Barbara and Nathan do not value genuine connection or family bonds. They value the performance of superiority. They use perceived wealth and status as a theatrical shield to hide their profound personal and financial deficits. When their actual resources dry up, they do not face reality or ask for help with humility. Instead, they double down on the illusion, cannibalizing anyone around them to keep the stage props standing. They fundamentally believe that if they just look the part, they are eternally entitled to the privileges. They construct a hollow, decaying empire and expect you to quietly pay the contractors forever. But a social media illusion cannot process a credit card transaction, and unearned prestige cannot turn the electricity back on. They were sitting in the dark, pretending everything was absolutely perfect, entirely dependent on the woman they had spent years marginalizing and pushing aside. I didn't reply to a single message or answer a single call. Let them eat their cold, unpaid holiday meal by candlelight. let Sarah see the stark reality of the grand family legacy she was so eager to remain attached to. I opened a fresh, blank spreadsheet and began meticulously calculating the exact current market value of the manor. I was no longer an interim guest waiting for validation. I was the sole legal proprietor, and I was actively preparing to liquidate the asset to the highest bidder. On Monday morning, I did not return to the dark, silent manor. Within the week, Marcus had filed the urgent petition for partition, and by the following Friday, the process server was at their door. I wasn't just filing for a standard, drawn-out divorce. I wanted to execute a complete and total legal extraction of my assets. I instructed Marcus to initiate a partition action immediately, a powerful, devastating legal maneuver designed to force the immediate sale of a jointly occupied property. Because the property was secured entirely through my private inheritance trust before our marriage was legally registered, Nathan had absolutely no claim to it. Barbara was simply a squatter living entirely on my good graces, which had officially expired. Marcus reviewed the ledger and drafted the paperwork with lethal, methodical efficiency. I wanted the delivery of the documents to be undeniable, swift, and completely public. The following morning, the trap snapped shut. Nathan, Barbara, and Sarah, who had apparently extended her holiday stay despite the lack of electricity, were sitting down for a cold breakfast in the unheated dining room. I monitored the entire sequence through the exterior security cameras I still controlled. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a utility worker coming to restore the power, and it wasn't a neighbor checking in. It was the professional process server I had hired, carrying a thick stack of certified legal documents. Nathan opened the pale front door with an arrogant scowl, expecting to berate whoever was interrupting his morning. The process server simply handed him the heavy envelope, confirmed his identity, and walked away. I watched the live feed on my laptop as Nathan tore open the seal. The color instantly and completely drained from his face. He staggered backward, dropping the papers onto the marble foyer floor. Barbara rushed over, snatching the documents, her eyes scanning the bold, uncompromising legal print. It was a formal eviction warning and a binding notice of a forced property sale. The documents clearly and irrevocably stated that the manor, the absolute crown jewel of Barbara's entire social identity, was the sole legal property of my private trust. Because the manor was held in a private trust and they were guests with an expired revocable license, the court granted an expedited vacate order due to the documented criminal fraud. They had exactly 30 days to vacate the premises entirely. The realization hit them like a physical, devastating blow. The quiet guest wing tenant they had constantly dismissed was actually the legal landlord. Their entire existence, their social standing, their daily comfort, had been a temporary lease that I had just permanently terminated. Nathan tried to call my cell phone 22 times in the span of a single hour. I blocked his number, secured my accounts, and forwarded all family communication directly to Marcus. The legal siege had officially begun, and I had fortified all the exits. With the house securely listed on the commercial market and the divorce proceedings operating in aggressive motion, I could have stopped there. But a thorough financial analyst never leaves an audit unfinished. While Marcus handled the eviction logistics and property showings, I initiated a deep dive, forensic review of our joint tax records and historical investment portfolios spanning the past 3 years. I needed to know exactly where Nathan's supposed app development funds had been disappearing to, and I needed absolute certainty. Numbers leave an immutable trail. You just have to know how to follow the digital breadcrumbs. I began cross-referencing our joint investment accounts against Nathan's personal withdrawals and business expenses. That is when I found the critical anomaly. 2 years ago, a substantial high-yield mutual fund in my name had been quietly liquidated. The authorization forms were buried deep within a digital archive. I pulled the digital audit logs. It wasn't a forgery of my signature, but a sophisticated breach. They had used my stolen credentials to bypass multi-factor authentication while I was busy managing their lives, funneling the funds through a hidden proxy server. It was my name, but it was absolutely not my handwriting. The loops were too wide, the pressure all wrong, the slant entirely incorrect. It was a blatant, clumsy forgery. But the rabbit hole went significantly deeper. I traced the routing numbers for the liquidated funds. The money hadn't gone into Nathan's business accounts or server hosting fees. It had been systematically transferred in discrete increments of $5,000 into an offshore holding account. From there, the funds were funneled directly to a domestic bank account belonging to Sarah, the ex-wife. The entire picture became chillingly, undeniably clear. Nathan's failing app development career was just a convenient front. He and Barbara had been forging my signature to liquidate my premarital assets, using my money to secretly fund Sarah's luxury lifestyle and maintain the illusion of Nathan's financial success for his ex-wife and son. Barbara had notarized the fraudulent documents herself, illegally using an expired notary seal to bypass the bank's security protocols. They hadn't just been ungrateful, parasitic beneficiaries. They were active, coordinated financial predators. I didn't feel a surge of panic, devastation, or emotional betrayal. I felt the absolute icy calm of holding an unbeatable winning hand. The divorce was no longer the primary issue. The narrative had violently and permanently shifted from a civil family dispute over property to criminal fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. I packaged the forged documents, the offshore routing numbers, the notary stamps, and the corresponding bank statements into a heavily encrypted file. I sent it directly to Marcus, officially copying the local district attorney's fraud division. They had thought I was a naive, compliant bankroll they could quietly bleed dry over decades. Instead, they had walked themselves blindly and arrogantly into an inescapable federal paperwork trap. I watched the upload progress bar hit 100%, confirming the transmission of their ruin. There was no negotiation left to be had. I was completely dismantling the financial architecture of their deceit, brick by fraudulent brick. The manor sold in 21 days to a corporate real estate developer who intended to gut the property and subdivide the land. The all-cash offer was well above market value, sealing their fate. On the final day of their legally mandated eviction notice, Nathan and Barbara arrived at the lobby of my high-security hotel. They looked utterly haggard, completely stripped of their designer arrogance and country club pretense. Sarah had abandoned them the exact moment the illicit funds dried up, leaving Nathan entirely alone to face the consequences of his actions. I met them in the hotel's private conference lounge, with Marcus at my side. I had previously notified the hotel management that I would be hosting a private legal settlement. Nathan stepped forward, his voice cracking with desperation, pleading for a financial reprieve. He begged me to stop the sale, to remember our marital vows, to give them just a little more time to find a place to live. Barbara was weeping openly, completely stripped of her matriarchal pride, asking how I could leave family out on the street with nowhere to go. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show an ounce of pity. I simply unclasped my leather briefcase and handed Nathan a thick manila folder. Inside were the high-resolution copies of the forged mutual fund liquidations, the routing numbers to Sarah's bank accounts, and the pending criminal indictment draft from the district attorney's office. I am not leaving family on the street, I said, my voice perfectly level and analytical. I am turning over financial predators to the proper authorities. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because your choices have consequences, and today, you are finally paying the invoice. The power flip was absolute and devastating. Nathan dropped the folder, the papers scattering across the lobby floor. His hands shook violently as the reality of his impending prison sentence finally crushed him. Barbara let out a hollow, gasping sob, finally understanding that the fake empire she had built on my dime was completely demolished. I turned my back on them and walked toward the elevator, leaving them to the severe legal consequences of their own accounting. The dust has settled now, the divorce is finalized, the criminal charges are actively proceeding through the courts, and my financial portfolio is completely secure. But more importantly, my operational peace of mind is fully restored. I want to write this to anyone out there who feels like they are constantly standing on the margins of their own life. To the people who are treated as endless utility, who are expected to give endlessly while receiving nothing but disrespect and displacement in return. I've come to realize that you do not have to earn your place in a room that you built yourself. You do not have to accept the role of the perpetual outsider, the interim guest, or the silent sponsor to someone else's fragile ego. We are often taught that endurance is a virtue, that keeping the peace is always more important than protecting our own borders. But forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. And freeing yourself means stepping completely away from the people who only value you for what they can extract from your reserves. You have the absolute right to audit your life, to identify the toxic liabilities, and to ruthlessly cut the supply lines to those who disrespect you. When you stop financing your own disrespect, the people who relied on your compliance will call you cold. Let them. Your peace is worth more than their comfort. You are the architect of your own future, and you get to decide who is allowed to cross the threshold. Your worth is not determined by how much financial or emotional abuse you can absorb. Your worth is inherent, and your life belongs entirely to you. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And don't forget to subscribe for more grounded, real stories that prove you have the power to define your own worth. Drop a yes in the comments if you're ready to start building your own foundation.